Today, we're diving into the subtle art of not giving a FCK* by Mark Manson, a refreshing take on personal growth that challenges the usual self-help cliches. This book isn't about avoiding problems or chasing constant happiness. Instead, it's about choosing what truly matters to you and letting go of the rest. Manson argues that real freedom comes not from trying to avoid suffering, but from finding meaningful reasons to embrace it. Each chapter breaks down powerful lessons on resilience, responsibility, and values, teaching us how to build a more grounded, purpose-driven life. So, whether you're struggling with self-doubt, feeling overwhelmed by expectations, or just looking for a fresh perspective, stay tuned as we explore Manson's unapologetic approach to living with fewer regrets and more authenticity. Let's get started. Chapter 1. Don't Try. This chapter introduces readers to Mark Manson's unconventional approach to self-help, which rejects the constant pressure to always strive for more. Manson's title is inspired by a phrase on the tombstone of American writer Charles Bukowski, a man known for his nihilistic views and raw, unapologetic prose. Don't Try encapsulates Bukowski's belief in embracing one's flaws rather than endlessly striving for perfection. In this chapter, Manson suggests that chasing happiness and success at all costs often leads to dissatisfaction. Instead, he argues for a more selective approach to what we choose to care about, which can create a more fulfilling life. The main lesson in this chapter is that relentless pursuit of success or happiness can ironically lead to a sense of inadequacy. Manson argues that the cultural obsession with positivity and living your best life has created a generation of people who feel constantly lacking. When people chase the idea of an ideal life or become obsessed with self-improvement, they can fall into a cycle of feeling like they're never enough. Manson uses a humorous example of trying to avoid thinking about a pink elephant to illustrate this paradox. The more you try to avoid a thought, the more persistent it becomes. In a similar way, the more we try to be happy, the more elusive happiness can feel. Another important takeaway from this chapter is the idea of selective caring. Manson encourages readers to be deliberate about where they invest their energy and emotions. Not every failure or success should weigh heavily on one's self-worth. He argues that true strength lies in knowing what to ignore and what is genuinely worthy of concern. For instance, instead of trying to be liked by everyone, Manson suggests finding a few things you deeply care about and focusing on them, rather than spreading your energy thin. In a world where many people are pressured to succeed in every aspect of life, Manson's approach is refreshingly liberating. This first chapter also touches on the power of embracing mediocrity and imperfection. Manson notes that many people struggle with feeling average and are desperate to stand out or achieve something extraordinary. Yet, he argues, embracing our ordinariness can free us from the pressure to constantly prove ourselves. He illustrates this with the example of musicians. The ones who truly love making music, whether or not they achieve fame, are happier than those who pursue it only for recognition. This detachment from outcomes, according to Manson, allows for more authentic fulfillment. In conclusion, Chapter 1 of the subtle art of not giving a FCK* teaches readers to embrace imperfection, let go of societal pressures, and focus only on what truly matters. By not trying to achieve happiness and success at every turn, we can achieve a more grounded sense of contentment. This chapter encourages readers to rethink their relationship with success and happiness, offering an alternative path where fulfillment comes from selective caring rather than relentless striving. Through humorous examples and unconventional wisdom, Manson sets the tone for the rest of his book, challenging readers to redefine their values. Chapter 2. Happiness is a Problem. In this chapter, Mark Manson explores the paradox of happiness, arguing that it often eludes those who chase it directly. Manson begins by asserting that happiness is not a permanent state and that viewing it as a fixed goal is misleading. Instead, happiness is a byproduct of solving meaningful problems. This chapter encourages readers to rethink their expectations about happiness, suggesting that it's less about seeking positive experiences and more about choosing struggles worth engaging with. Manson argues that if we fixate on happiness alone, we are likely to end up disappointed, because life inherently involves challenges, frustrations, and setbacks. One key lesson from this chapter is that problems are unavoidable and that they are not something to be fixed once and for all. Manson uses the analogy that problems in life are like waves in the ocean. They keep coming, and attempting to stop them only leads to more suffering. Rather than seeing problems as obstacles to happiness, Manson suggests embracing them as natural aspects of life. According to him, our well-being is more about the quality of the problems we choose to engage with rather than the absence of problems. For instance, a person who values deep relationships may find joy in dealing with the inevitable conflicts or misunderstandings that arise, while someone who avoids all conflict may end up lonely and unfulfilled. Manson also delves into the idea that happiness itself is a form of problem-solving. When we focus on what matters to us, we're better equipped to face challenges, which then brings fulfillment and a sense of purpose. In contrast, when we strive for happiness without defining what we value, we may fall into a cycle of superficial pleasures that provide temporary satisfaction but leave us feeling empty. For example, if a person's idea of happiness is based on accumulating wealth, they might experience fleeting moments of joy with each new purchase. But this pleasure will diminish over time if it's not linked to something more meaningful, like financial security or providing for loved ones. Another important insight from this chapter is the concept of the backwards law, which states that the pursuit of positive experiences often reinforces their absence. When we chase happiness directly, we become more conscious of our current dissatisfaction, creating a loop of constant comparison between our reality and the ideal we imagine. Manson points out that accepting dissatisfaction as a part of life paradoxically leads to greater peace. This approach echoes Eastern philosophies, where letting go of the need for control often brings a greater sense of harmony. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes that life's struggles and challenges are essential components of a fulfilling life. By shifting our focus from avoiding problems to selecting meaningful ones, we can approach life with a greater sense of resilience and purpose. Manson's message is clear. Happiness isn't a destination, but an ongoing process shaped by the problems we choose to tackle. This chapter encourages readers to redefine happiness as the satisfaction found in facing worthwhile struggles, rather than in escaping them. Chapter 3. You Are Not Special. Chapter 3 of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F*** by Mark Manson, titled You Are Not Special, challenges the commonly held belief that everyone is inherently exceptional. Manson critiques the overemphasis on self-importance and constant validation that has become prevalent in modern culture. He argues that believing oneself to be special can foster unrealistic expectations, entitlement, and ultimately, disappointment. This chapter discusses the value of embracing ordinariness and being content with it, encouraging readers to let go of the societal pressures to be extraordinary. By accepting that we are not inherently special, we can free ourselves from constantly needing to prove our worth. Manson argues that the special snowflake mentality can lead people down a path of entitlement, where they believe they deserve success, happiness, or recognition without necessarily working for it. This entitlement can hinder personal growth, as it discourages people from facing their own flaws or weaknesses. When individuals feel that they are uniquely special, they are less likely to engage in self-reflection or accept constructive criticism. For example, someone who believes they are naturally gifted might resist learning from their failures, assuming they don't need to improve. Manson points out that personal growth happens through confronting challenges, acknowledging imperfections, and working to overcome them, something entitlement actively prevents. Moreover, Manson explains that accepting ordinariness does not mean that life becomes dull or meaningless. Instead, it shifts focus toward cultivating genuine connections, meaningful experiences, and authentic achievements. By letting go of the need to be extraordinary, we create space to focus on the things that genuinely matter to us. For instance, rather than pursuing a career solely for prestige, one could choose a path aligned with their values and interests, leading to greater satisfaction and fulfillment. Manson suggests that recognizing our own ordinariness allows us to enjoy and appreciate life as it is, rather than constantly comparing ourselves to others or striving for superficial accomplishments. In this chapter, Manson emphasizes that realizing we are not special does not devalue our lives, but rather normalizes the human experience, making it easier to connect with others. Recognizing that everyone has similar struggles, dreams, and insecurities builds empathy and understanding. This connection with others is crucial because it grounds us and removes the isolation that often accompanies self-centered thinking. Rather than constantly seeking validation or recognition, we can appreciate the shared aspects of humanity and find value in being part of something bigger than ourselves. Ultimately, the lesson in Chapter 3 is about humility and acceptance. By acknowledging that we are not special, we are freed from the pressure to constantly seek validation or impress others. This realization allows us to set more realistic goals, handle setbacks with resilience, and find meaning in the ordinary aspects of life. Manson argues that the sooner we come to terms with our limitations, the sooner we can focus on cultivating a life filled with meaningful relationships and purposeful goals. The chapter encourages readers to redefine success on their own terms, focusing less on external validation and more on the intrinsic value of their experiences and connections. Chapter 4. The Value of Suffering. In Chapter 4 of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***, titled The Value of Suffering, Mark Manson presents the concept that our life's meaning is often derived from the struggles and challenges we willingly choose to face. Manson argues that everyone experiences pain and hardship, but not all suffering is equal. What distinguishes meaningful suffering from meaningless pain is whether it aligns with our values. By carefully choosing the kind of struggles we engage in, we gain a sense of purpose and fulfillment that ultimately enriches our lives. According to Manson, suffering is inevitable, but we can determine whether that suffering serves a purpose. One of the central lessons in this chapter is that our choice of struggles reflects our values and shapes who we become. Manson argues that we often chase superficial goals or values, like wealth, fame, or beauty, without realizing the pain and sacrifice required to achieve them. When these goals don't fulfill us, we are left disillusioned. For instance, someone might strive for professional success only to find themselves burn out, as they were driven by societal expectations rather than personal passion. Manson suggests that it's vital to choose struggles aligned with our core values, as these lead to a deeper sense of satisfaction. This helps us focus on pursuits that bring us long-term happiness, not fleeting gratification. Manson's view on the value of suffering challenges the common belief that happiness is about minimizing discomfort. He argues that true contentment arises from committing to something worth struggling for, like a rewarding relationship, career, or personal goal. For example, a parent may endure sleepless nights and personal sacrifices for the well-being of their child, which brings immense fulfillment even though it involves hardship. By accepting that some suffering is necessary for a meaningful life, we shift our focus from avoiding discomfort to embracing purposeful pain. This approach allows us to channel our energy into areas that resonate with our values. In discussing the types of suffering we should embrace, Manson emphasizes the importance of choosing battles that we can realistically face and sustain over time. Rather than aspiring for an idealized version of success, it's wiser to pursue goals that align with our strengths and are within our reach. For instance, someone who values creativity might suffer through the grueling process of learning an instrument or honing an artistic skill, enduring frustration, but ultimately achieving mastery. Manson's advice encourages us to measure our lives not by our achievements, but by the struggles we are willing to endure and the growth they foster. Ultimately, the value of suffering pushes us to rethink our relationship with pain and struggle, seeing it not as something to escape, but as a necessary ingredient for a meaningful life. This perspective can be freeing, as it removes the pressure to constantly chase comfort and pleasure. Instead, Manson encourages us to define our values and choose meaningful challenges that align with them. By willingly embracing the right kind of suffering, we not only build resilience, but also create a life that is authentic and deeply satisfying. Chapter 5. You are always choosing. In Chapter 5, Mark Manson delves into the idea of personal responsibility and the choices we make in life. He argues that, regardless of external circumstances, each individual has the power to choose how they respond to life's events. While we may not have control over what happens to us, we do have control over our reactions, attitudes, and interpretations. This is an empowering realization, as it shifts the focus from external blame to internal responsibility. Manson suggests that embracing responsibility for our choices helps us take ownership of our lives, fostering resilience and growth. One of the chapter's key lessons is that responsibility and fault are separate concepts. Manson uses this distinction to illustrate that while we may not be at fault for certain events, such as experiencing a difficult childhood, job loss, or health issues, we are still responsible for how we respond to them. He explains that when we confuse fault with responsibility, we tend to place blame on external factors, leaving us feeling powerless and victimized. By recognizing that we have the freedom to choose our responses, we regain a sense of agency, which can be empowering. For instance, if someone loses their job unexpectedly, it may not be their fault, but they are responsible for deciding whether they approach the situation with despair or use it as an opportunity to seek a new direction in life. Manson further illustrates that the choices we make reflect our values. He emphasizes that our decisions, whether intentional or subconscious, reveal what we truly care about. For example, a person who prioritizes career advancement may choose to invest extra hours in work, sacrificing time with family or friends. This choice, Manson argues, is not inherently good or bad, but speaks to that individual's values. Understanding this can help people reflect on what truly matters to them and evaluate whether their daily choices align with those priorities. By consistently choosing actions that align with our values, we can create a more authentic and fulfilling life. An example Manson uses is about a friend who chooses to constantly complain about their problems rather than taking action to address them. This highlights that even the choice to complain is still a choice, albeit one that often reinforces negativity and stagnation. Instead, choosing to address the root causes of dissatisfaction requires courage and responsibility. Through this perspective, Manson shows that our choices not only shape our lives but also our relationships, our careers, and our happiness. It's a call to be intentional about our actions, no matter how small they may seem. Ultimately, Chapter 5 challenges readers to confront the idea that they are responsible for creating their own happiness and sense of fulfillment. Manson's message is that life will inevitably involve struggles and setbacks, but our freedom lies in how we respond to these challenges. By accepting that we are always choosing, we can start making choices that lead us toward growth, resilience, and purpose. Through this approach, Manson empowers readers to become active participants in their lives rather than passive observers, teaching that true power lies in the choices we make. Chapter 6. You're wrong about everything, but so am I. This chapter delves into the nature of our beliefs, biases, and how we often hold on to false certainties about ourselves and the world. Mark Manson argues that most people are convinced of their own rightness, believing they know the truth about themselves, others, and life in general. However, he challenges readers to question their certainties, as much of what we hold as true may be based on incomplete knowledge, faulty logic, or personal bias. Manson emphasizes that growth happens not through an insistence on being right, but by acknowledging our fallibility and the limits of our understanding. A central idea in this chapter is the importance of intellectual humility, accepting that we don't know as much as we think we do and that our understanding is constantly evolving. Manson uses the example of how our beliefs can change over time. For instance, what someone believes in their 20s can look very different from what they believe in their 40s. This change doesn't imply that people were wrong before. Rather, it's a reminder that our experiences and new information constantly shape our perspectives. By recognizing that our beliefs might be temporary or misguided, we open ourselves up to new ideas and are less likely to cling to outdated views out of stubbornness or fear. The chapter also stresses the importance of questioning our perceptions, as doing so can improve our decision-making and relationships. Manson points out that a lot of personal and social conflict arises from the assumption that one's perspective is the only right one. When people are convinced of their own correctness, they dismiss others' viewpoints, which can lead to misunderstanding, resentment, or even hostility. Instead, Manson encourages readers to approach disagreements with curiosity rather than defensiveness, acknowledging that there's always a possibility they could be wrong. This mindset fosters a greater openness to compromise, empathy, and shared understanding. Manson uses the metaphor of mental blind spots to explain why we sometimes cling to harmful or inaccurate beliefs. Just as a driver has blind spots they cannot see without making an effort, we all have mental blind spots in which our biases or experiences cloud our judgment. For example, someone who has had a string of negative relationships might come to believe that all relationships are destined to fail, even though this is based on limited personal experience. Recognizing these blind spots requires a willingness to challenge one's assumptions, which can be uncomfortable but ultimately rewarding. Finally, Manson's chapter highlights how embracing uncertainty can actually lead to a more fulfilled life. When we let go of the need to be certain, we stop placing so much pressure on ourselves to be right all the time and allow ourselves the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. This willingness to question and adapt creates resilience, as we're not locked into rigid ideas or expectations. By understanding that we're wrong more often than we think, we cultivate a mindset that values growth over the ego's need for validation, helping us approach life with greater flexibility and openness to change. Chapter 7. Failure is the way forward. In Chapter 7, Mark Manson explores the idea that failure is not something to be feared or avoided, but rather an essential component of personal growth and success. Manson argues that failure is inevitable, and instead of viewing it as a setback, we should embrace it as a vital part of our journey toward achieving our goals. He challenges the common notion that success should come easily, emphasizing that it is through failure that we learn, adapt, and ultimately thrive. This chapter calls for a shift in how we perceive failure, not as something to shy away from, but as a stepping stone to greater achievements. Manson's perspective on failure is rooted in the idea that we must be willing to take risks and make mistakes in order to grow. He highlights how many people avoid failure by playing it safe, sticking to what's comfortable or familiar, and avoiding challenges. However, this approach often leads to stagnation and dissatisfaction. Instead of being paralyzed by the fear of failure, Manson encourages us to confront our fears head-on. He suggests that failure should be seen as a process of trial and error, where each mistake provides valuable feedback that brings us closer to success. For example, an entrepreneur launching a new business may face setbacks, but each failure offers insights that help refine their approach and increase the chances of future success. One key lesson from this chapter is that failure is not just about mistakes, but also about learning how to handle setbacks in a healthy way. Manson emphasizes that resilience is built through facing difficulties and embracing discomfort. He draws attention to the fact that we often fail in areas that matter the most: relationships, careers, and personal growth. But it is through these very failures that we develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and our goals. By accepting that failure is part of the process, we reduce the emotional weight associated with it, allowing us to bounce back stronger and more prepared for future challenges. The lesson here is that embracing failure, rather than avoiding it, is what ultimately leads to long-term success. Manson also introduces the concept of the feedback loop from hell, which occurs when people repeatedly avoid failure, leading to a cycle of self-doubt and insecurity. When we reject failure, we become paralyzed by fear and inaction, which only deepens our frustration. Manson advises that instead of trying to avoid mistakes, we should focus on what we can learn from each failure. He provides examples of successful people, such as Thomas Edison and Michael Jordan, who embraced their failures and used them as stepping stones toward their achievements. For instance, Edison famously said, "I have not failed. "I just found 10,000 ways that won't work," showing his mindset that failure was merely part of the process of discovery. In conclusion, Manson's failure is the way forward encourages a radical shift in perspective toward failure. Rather than viewing failure as a sign of weakness or incompetence, we should recognize it as an essential tool for growth. The chapter teaches us that success is not a linear path, but a process of learning, adapting, and persevering through challenges. By reframing failure as a necessary and valuable experience, we can approach life with more courage, resilience, and determination. The chapter's ultimate message is that failure is not only inevitable, but also the key to becoming better versions of ourselves. Chapter 8. The importance of saying no. This chapter delves into the crucial role that boundaries play in shaping a meaningful life. Manson argues that learning to say no is not just a skill, but a necessary tool for protecting our time, energy, and emotional well-being. In a world where people often say yes out of fear of rejection or a desire to please others, Manson contends that saying no is empowering. He stresses that we cannot say yes to everything without depleting ourselves. Therefore, we must be intentional about where we direct our attention and energy. At the core of the chapter is the idea that every choice we make involves sacrifice. By saying yes to something, we are inherently saying no to something else. For instance, if you agree to attend a social event that doesn't align with your priorities, you are saying no to spending time on your personal goals, health, or family. Manson encourages readers to recognize this trade-off and to value their time and resources enough to make choices that align with their personal values. Saying no becomes an act of honoring what truly matters to us, rather than engaging in every opportunity or demand that comes our way. Manson also emphasizes that saying no can be uncomfortable, especially in a culture that celebrates people-pleasing and overcommitment. Many individuals struggle to say no because they fear rejection or disappointing others. However, Manson highlights that this discomfort is often temporary, and in many cases, the benefits of setting boundaries far outweigh the initial awkwardness. For example, turning down an invitation to a social gathering when you need time to recharge, or focusing on work instead of engaging in a distracting conversation might feel rude in the moment, but it ensures you're investing your energy in more meaningful pursuits. The chapter also touches on the importance of understanding your values in order to make these decisions effectively. Manson argues that when you are clear about your values, it becomes easier to say no to things that don't align with them. For instance, if you value personal growth, you might say no to engagements or activities that pull you away from learning or pursuing your passions. Conversely, if family is a core value, saying no to work or social obligations that interfere with family time becomes much easier. In this sense, saying no is not just about rejecting something, but about protecting what truly supports your long-term happiness and fulfillment. Finally, Manson's chapter illustrates the power of saying no not only for self-preservation, but for creating healthier relationships. By setting clear boundaries, you show respect for both your own needs and the needs of others. People will come to appreciate your honesty and will be more likely to respect your boundaries, creating a dynamic where mutual respect is valued. In a relationship, for example, saying no to unreasonable demands or excessive dependency is not a rejection of the person, but rather a way to nurture a balanced and healthy connection. Ultimately, learning to say no is a fundamental skill that fosters a life of purpose, autonomy, and greater emotional health. Chapter 9. And Then You Die. In Chapter 9, which is the last chapter in this book, Mark Manson delves into the inevitable reality of death. He asserts that mortality is the ultimate truth that shapes our existence. By acknowledging that we all will eventually die, we are forced to confront the meaning and purpose of our lives. Rather than fearing death, Manson suggests that we should use it as a lens through which we can evaluate what truly matters. The awareness of our finite time on Earth prompts us to stop wasting our energy on trivial pursuits and focus on what aligns with our deeper values and desires. Manson explores the concept of death anxiety, which is the discomfort and fear that arises when we face the fact that our lives are limited. This existential anxiety is a universal experience, and it often leads people to live their lives in a way that avoids confronting it, by distracting themselves with superficial goals or chasing endless success. However, Manson argues that confronting death head-on allows us to make more intentional choices. For instance, by considering how we want to be remembered after our death, we can prioritize relationships, personal growth, and the pursuit of meaningful goals over fleeting pleasures or societal expectations. A key lesson in this chapter is the importance of accepting that we cannot control the timing of our death. This realization frees us from the constant pressure to achieve more, accumulate more, or be more. Manson illustrates this with a poignant example: the idea that we spend so much of our lives accumulating things and striving for success, yet we cannot take any of it with us when we die. This highlights the futility of trying to live for external validation or material gain. Instead, the chapter encourages us to question the meaning of our accomplishments and focus on the things that truly bring us fulfillment, such as personal relationships, emotional connections, and contributing to a greater purpose. Moreover, Manson challenges the modern obsession with living a life of comfort and safety. Many people avoid the hard truths of life, seeking constant pleasure and avoiding discomfort. However, he emphasizes that it is through confronting discomfort, whether in relationships, work, or personal growth, that we find true meaning. He suggests that without struggle or challenge, life would feel meaningless, like an endless pursuit of pleasure that lacks depth. For example, a person may choose to stay in a dead-end job simply to avoid the discomfort of change, but in doing so, they rob themselves of the opportunity to pursue something that is truly meaningful. In contrast, facing hardship can lead to personal development and a deeper sense of purpose. Ultimately, in this last chapter, Manson advocates for a shift in perspective. Instead of avoiding death or being consumed by the fear of it, we should embrace it as a natural part of life. By doing so, we are freed to live more authentically. This chapter's central message is that our awareness of mortality should not paralyze us, but instead motivate us to live more intentionally. The decisions we make, the relationships we nurture, and the legacy we create should reflect our deepest values, rather than external pressures or societal expectations. Death, in Manson's view, is not something to fear, but a reminder to live a life that is meaningful and true to ourselves. In conclusion, the subtle art of not giving a f*** offers a much-needed perspective shift on how we approach life, challenges, and personal growth. Mark Manson teaches us that we don't need to care about everything. In fact, it's the selective focus on the things that truly matter that leads to a fulfilling life. By accepting that struggles and pain are inevitable, embracing our imperfections, and setting boundaries around our time and energy, we can free ourselves from the unrealistic pursuit of constant happiness. Instead of striving for more, we learn to focus on less, but with greater intention. So, if you're ready to stop stressing about things that don't serve you, choose your values wisely, and embrace failure as part of the journey, this book is a game changer. If you enjoyed this summary, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more insights like this. Thanks for watching, and remember, life is too short to care about everything, so focus on what truly matters.